In our first lecture, we talked about some of the basic elements of a clinical trial and some of the key players that are associated with conducting clinical research. In this lecture, we're going to talk about some of the data management activities that occur in clinical research, and I'm going to take you through some of those as we move along. We're going to be talking about job roles in data management. These will be roles that generally occur or exist rather at the sponsor level, or it could be with a contract research organization or CRO, which in many cases the sponsor will outsource these activities to a CRO. So we'll talk about those. We're also going to talk about the data management plan, the elements that go into the data management plan, how it's used, and what its purpose is. And I think you'll gain a little more knowledge of that as we move along. Our learning objectives are going to be to define data management activities. We're also going to describe the job roles in data management and go over some of the details and some of the specific tasks that those people might do. And then we'll also discuss the elements of the data management plan. There are going to be several documents that make up our data management plan. It is going to be a living document that can change and be updated throughout the trial, and it's going to really kind of manage all of our activities that we're going to be doing with respect to our data management activities in the course. Let's get started by describing what is data management. Data management is simply the art and science of creating a computer database of clinical trial data for efficient and comprehensive analysis. As I mentioned in our first lecture, the purpose of a clinical trial is to create a data set that can then be used to analyze the safety and efficacy of our investigational product, whether it's a drug product or whether it's a medical device. And then we want to take that data set after we've performed our analysis on it and determine that we can support, that we can suitably say that our product is safe and effective. We want to submit that to the FDA or to other regulatory agency for approval. So all of our data management activities are oriented toward creating that data set that's going to be able to support our marketing application. Let's talk about the sequence of events that we're going to do from the inception of our trial all the way through to the end where we've got a locked database that's ready for analysis. So if you'll look at our startup graphic here, I'm going to explain these different steps and I think they'll make a lot more sense to you as we go along. So we're going to start out in the upper left corner, and we've got our protocol, and our protocol is also going to include some other documents that are associated with the trial, but our protocol is going to specifically identify everything that we're going to do to conduct that trial. And as I mentioned in our first lecture, these documents are typically anywhere from maybe 100 to 200 pages or so, around that length. And they're going to document all the assessments that are going to occur at each visit when the patients come in, and the type of data analysis that's going to be done on the data as we collect it. Once we get our protocol document completed, we're going to create our case report form or our case report form specifications. These can be done either on paper or they can be done online if we're going to be using an electronic data capture system. So we're going to create that. We're going to take that protocol and determine every single data element that we're going to have to capture in our trial, and we're going to create that on a case report form that's going to be our primary instrument for collecting data during our trial. Once we've done that, we're going to start to build and validate our database and our electronic data capture tools that we're going to use. These are going to be used by the clinical site. So when the patient comes in for their patient visits, let's say Duke or UNC or whatever center they're going to, The medical people at the site, they're going to collect a series of data for that visit. And then if it's an EDC system, they're going to actually import that, enter that directly into the clinical database. If we're having to use a paper trial, there are plenty of paper trials that go on out there right now. We're not going to get rid of paper anytime soon. It's still going to exist for a while. Then they would simply write that data, record that data on the paper, then they would send it in to the sponsor. While we're doing that, we're also developing our data management plan. And this is going to detail and discuss all the activities that are related to data management that we're going to do throughout the course of the trial. Some of these activities may change. So there'll be a series of documents that make up the overall data plan, and some of those may change as we go along. We may have protocol amendments, for example. That is not unusual to have multiple protocol amendments during the course of a trial, and that may change some of the data that we collect, may change a few things that we do during the course of the trial. So the next thing that's going to happen is once we get our CRF completed, we're starting to build our database, we're going to begin to define and create the edit checks that we're going to use in order to help us clean the data. What these edit checks do is they run on the data that's been entered, and any sort of discrepancy that they may find, they're going to fire, and these can go either directly to the site for them to resolve right away, or they may fire at a status where someone has to review them and determine whether or not it should be sent to the site. So that discrepancy should be sent to the site in order for them to reconcile and resolve those discrepancies. So we want to get those edit checks in. We're going to test them, make sure they're working properly before we're going to put them into production and let them run. So once we've done that, then if we're down to the bottom row here, so the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to start to enroll patients in our trial. And so they're going to come in for their visits, and at the various clinical sites, the sites are going to perform the assessments. They're going to start recording the data and entering it into our database. So then once we've done that, or once the site has done that, that data is going to then be reviewed. So more than likely what's going to happen is our CRA or our monitor is going to go out, and they're going to do what's known as source data verification, where they're going to compare the source document, which at the site is going to be a medical record, or it could be a lab report or some other source, and they're going to compare that to what has been recorded in the database, or if it's a paper trial, what's been recorded on the paper CRF. So they're going to verify that the data has been recorded accurately. They're going to attest to its accuracy, and then they're going to sign off on that and indicate that it's been source data verified. Once they've done that, then our discrepancies, our edit checks can start firing, and then we can find other discrepancies in the data. We're looking for logical discrepancies that will occur. No CRA, no monitor is going to be able to find all of those when they go out. You just can't do that. You're not going to have enough time in order to find all those discrepant data points as they come along. So that part, we're going to let the edit check process handle that. We're also going to have other clinical data that's captured outside the database is going to be reviewed, such as, say, ECG data, lab data. You may have data from CT scans that we may need to review, and those are going to be entered, and we're going to discover some discrepancies from that. So now we're over to the big question mark there. So once we've got data entered into the database, we run our edit checks on that. We find all the discrepancies. Hopefully we find all the discrepancies. And then when we discover ones that need to be clarified by the site, we will send out data clarification forms to the site for them to take a look at, and for them to either resolve or provide further clarification as to why that discrepancy exists. Hopefully, they'll make a change to the data, and then it will no longer be a conflict with other data in our database. And if we're using a paper study, paper trial, those data clarification forms will go out to the site in paper form. They can write on them. The principal investigator will sign off on it, and then they'll send those back to us. And then we'll have someone at the sponsor or the CRO enter that data into our clinical database. If it's an EDC system where the site will have direct access to our clinical database, then they can make whatever changes they need to make at that point in order to resolve those conflicts, those discrepancies. So once we've gone through that and we feel like we've got all of we no longer have any edit checks that fire, we've cleared all of them, we've gotten everything clarified, we've got a clean data set. At that point, we're going to lock our database. No one will have access to it. We'll hand it over to our statisticians for them to perform their statistical analysis on that. So that's essentially the picture in a nutshell of how we're going to go from the trial inception, from the protocol design, all the way through to the database lock. So these are the various steps, and I'm going to go through these throughout the course so you'll have a good understanding of what occurs at each step. Let's talk about some of the data management activities that we're going to do during those steps. In the preceding graphic, I showed you an illustration of some of those steps. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail on that so you'll have a better understanding of it. For example, the data management plan creation. The data management plan is a collection of study-specific documents that detail the key planning and control elements for the study. Individual sections of the data management plan are completed as specified milestones during the project startup. As I said earlier, some of these documents may change throughout the course of the trial. So our data management plan consists of a number of documents, but it can change as we move along. So it is very much a living document. The case report form. The case report form is designed to collect all of the protocol required information to be reported to the sponsor for each trial subject. The quality of the data collected in the clinical trial relies on the quality of the case report form. So it's important to understand that a case report form is going to be, each patient is going to have a case book, which is going to be a series of case report forms. So it could be, they could have, pages that you'll get into the hundreds depending on the complexity of the trial. So each case report form, think of it as a single page of an entire notebook. And so throughout the course of the trial, we're going to collect data, and we're going to be adding data to our notebook for each patient throughout the trial. So at the end of the trial, we'll have an entire notebook, or case book is what we'll call it, for each trial subject, and then we'll have that data in our database for each subject. Moving along, we're going to do our database design and setup. Database design incorporates the procedures for developing and validating clinical databases. This includes data entry screens, edit programs, database conversion programs, quality control listing programs, external data loading programs, and reports. It's imperative this process is consistent, engineered to provide the desired results, including quality planning, and provides documentation to substantiate the validation process. So this is going to be our programmers and our other database designers are going to be involved in this particular portion of our activities. And so what they're doing, they're trying to get a database that's going to be able to collect the data that we need for our trial. Data capture and processing. Data capture refers to the methods in which electronic clinical data is received and managed. It encompasses how electronic clinical data is downloaded, tracked, and verified for completeness. So in most cases, for electronic data capture studies, the sites are going to be entering that data directly into our clinical database. For a paper study, they're going to enter the data, the clinical data, onto a written case report form, and then they're going to submit that form to the sponsor or the CRO, and then someone at that company will then enter it into the database. So it operates a little bit differently, but the concept is essentially the same. Once we start receiving data and getting data entered into our database, we're going to begin with our data review activities. So we have data validation, and clinical review is used to assure the integrity, accuracy, and validity of the data entered into the clinical database. So edit programs or edit checks and data listings are typically run against all the data available in the clinical database to identify any discrepancies. Discrepancies include data that might be may be inaccurate, illogical, incomplete, or a violation of protocol-specific rules and conventions, and therefore require review. For example, you may have maybe a clinical data, maybe the site enters blood pressure data that just seems completely illogical. It's 900 over 10, and they will make mistakes like that from time to time. That would be incompatible with a healthy subject, so obviously that's going to be outside the range, and that's going to probably cause an ed check to fire. Someone enters in the wrong year on a date of birth. Instead of entering say 1972, instead they enter 1872. Well, obviously that's going to create a conflict. So that would be an example of data that clearly would be an error and needs to be clarified. And we'll go over some more examples of those as we move along. But those are the type of things that our edit checks are going to be looking for as they run. They're going to be looking for discrepancies in the data that's been entered. Another data management activity is going to be our serious adverse event reconciliation. This refers to the process in which serious adverse events are recorded and reported. So generally a serious adverse event refers to any adverse experience that's fatal, that's life-threatening, disabling, or which results in the subject being hospitalized, or if the patient is already hospitalized, it extends that hospitalization. Sites are required to report these within 24 hours of their becoming aware of it. That doesn't mean that they report it from within 24 hours of when it occurs, because in many cases they won't know of these until the patient comes back in for a visit. So if they discover the patient comes in for a visit and they're on a monthly visit schedule and they say, oh, by the way, I was in the hospital last week with chest pains or something like that, then at that point they need to collect as much information from the patient as they can and then report that to the sponsor. They can do that in either pick the phone up and call, or they can send a fax or an email, but they need to alert the sponsor as quickly as possible within 24 hours of that serious adverse event. So the reconciliation piece is when you've got adverse events of which you're going to have a lot in a clinical trial. An adverse event can be anything from a headache to a heart attack or a skin rash to something else. So anything that's any change in the person's medical condition during the course of the trial could be considered an adverse event. So serious adverse events are those that either result in death, are considered life-threatening or disabling, or require the patient to be hospitalized. So serious adverse events have to be reported within 24 hours, of the notification of that, whereas an adverse event needs to be recorded as an adverse event on the CRF or in the clinical database. Data management quality control. Quality control refers to the operational techniques and activities for reviewing data and critical variables in order to ensure that the sponsor produces an analyzable clinical database of high quality. So quality control processes should generally begin early in the project to detect and correct common sources of error and to ensure that proper training to the investigative site and sponsor employees. So we want to start this process fairly early. We want to do some quality control specifically on critical variables, which are generally going to be your primary safety and efficacy data points, and probably are going to be about maybe 10 or 12% of the overall variables that you're going to collect during the trial. So we want to QC those, rather quickly, and we want to kind of do some basic analysis to see that sites are entering data correctly, that they're not making too many mistakes. As we see that, we may discover that multiple sites multiple sites are making the same mistake. And when that occurs, we may want to reach out to our sites and provide some clarification on how they should be collecting and entering that data. So we've talked about some of the basic activities that occur, some of the basic data management activities that occur. Next, we want to talk about some of the job roles that are associated with data management. So we have a few listed here. We have the clinical database programmer. For those of you that are experienced in programming, that will kind of be self-explanatory. We also have the clinical system development. We have the designer, the developer, and the tester. These are specifically people that work with the CRF development aspects. We also have the clinical data coordinator, which are people that they generally do the first review of the data and send out queries to the sites for clarification. Then we have the lead data manager, which is the person, think of that person as kind of the lead data management person involved in the trial, so they provide guidance to the clinical data coordinators and some of the other members of the team. The clinical database programmer. The role of the database programmer is to set up and maintain the database management system and the associated programs according to project specifications so that the study database is ready for use. There are a lot of specific clinical database programs that are common in our industry. A few of them that we're going to talk about during the course will be products such as Oracle Clinical, Data Labs, Metadata Rave is another, BioClinica is another that's gaining in popularity. So we'll talk about some of those as we go along, and we'll get into a little bit more detail in that area as we get into our CTMS, or excuse me, our clinical data management system lecture, and also our electronic data capture lecture as well. But the programmers are the ones that set these databases up and make sure they're functioning correctly and they're validated according to the requirements of our trial. For our clinical database programmers, they have a series of responsibilities. One of the things that they do, they're going to be involved in annotating the case report form prior to setting up and testing the database. So as we talked about in the earlier slide, the case report form is our primary instrument for collecting the data. So once we get that set up, once we get it created, we want to annotate it, which means to take that document and to provide information on it as far as the names of the variables and other metadata related to the variables that we need to know as we're moving along. We're going to use this to make sure that we can review data correctly. They're also going to be involved in helping to develop some of the elements of the data management plan. They're also going to be programming the edit checks into the database, make sure they fire correctly. They'll also be involved in a few of the other activities. Then finally, they're going to be pretty involved with freezing and locking our database once we get to the end of our trial. So they have some key responsibilities as they go along, not only in the startup phase, but even in the execution phase, and then the final database locking phase as well. The next job role is in clinical system development, and these roles are usually called the designer or the CRF developer, tester. What they do is they design the data collection tools, either a paper case report form or an electronic data capture screen, to collect data that's required by the study protocol. They generally work closely with the programmers, the database programmers, to set up the clinical database so that it can accept study data. So usually these people have to be very familiar with the protocol and be hopefully very familiar with other trials for that clinical indication, so that they can adequately design these systems, because their success in designing these data collection tools is going to be key to having a good functioning database once we start entering data to it. If they make some mistakes along that way, it can really create a lot of errors and create a lot of rework that could potentially prolong our trial and prolong, hopefully our regulatory approval. So it's important that they get it right, as they're moving along. So these people tend to be very experienced, very knowledgeable about not only the trial itself, but also with the capabilities of the database systems that they're working with. Some of the responsibilities of the clinical systems development staff: they're going to create data collection tools that match the protocol requirements. They're going to adapt the data collection specifications to meet the capabilities of the database platform. And then finally, they're going to ensure data quality by continuous testing, quality control, and error detection of data collection tools. So they have a very key role in developing all of this so that we have a smooth running trial. The next role is the clinical data coordinator. This may be called by a different name at another sponsor. It might be called data associate or data manager or something along those lines, but the roles are fairly consistent. The role of the clinical data coordinator is to assist in the development of project data management plans, and then review CRF data and resolve queries that are associated with that CRF data. Several of the specific responsibilities of the clinical data coordinator is to assist in developing the data management plan and providing input and drafting some of the sections. They're also going to perform some data review of the case report form in conjunction with the execution of the programmatic manual edit checks. So they're going to help validate some of those. Probably where they spend most of their time is in the data review activities, where they're going to review data and they're going to generate queries that are sent to the site for the site to resolve. And then once those sites have responded, they're going to be involved in resolving those queries and either making updates to the database or ensuring that the updates have been made to the database. They may also enter laboratory reference ranges and other lab data that may be associated with our trial. They're going to interact with the site and the CRAs, the monitors for the query resolution process to make sure that those queries get adequately processed and resolved. The next role that we're going to talk about is that of the lead data manager. The lead data manager is responsible for supervising the entire clinical data management process. And the data manager prepares the data management plan, approves the clinical data management procedures and all internal documents that are related to the clinical data management activities. Controlling and allocating the database access to team members is also a responsibility of this person. So they're very much a team leader. They'll have other people working with them that they're going to provide direction to, but they're going to be responsible for ensuring, data quality for the overall trial. So they have a lot of responsibility. Their responsibilities include overall data deliverables for the sponsor. They provide overall technical direction and expertise to the data management team. They act as project manager if it happens to be a data management only contracted study. Some cases, a sponsor may come to, say, a CRO and only want them to do the data management piece of the study. So they'll kind of act in a project management role if that's the case. And then their overall responsibility is to ensure overall data quality for all of our clinical trial data. So now that we've talked about some of the clinical or the data management roles and activities that we're going through, now we want to move on and let's talk about the data management plan, what that is, how it's used, and so forth. So the data management plan is a collection of study-specific documents that detail the key planning and control elements for the study. So we'll have individual sections of the plan and that are completed as specified during the startup. So couple of pieces of information that's going to be contained in our data management plan. It's going to describe what SOPs, what standing operating procedures are going to be used. If it's a CRO, we might use the CRO's SOPs, or it could be SOPs that our sponsor company is using, or it could be SOPs from a vendor, say from a laboratory or some other vendor that we might use. Any project-specific assumptions are going to be detailed in there. It's going to discuss what data management system is going to be used, whether it's Data Labs or Metadata, Oracle, BioClinica, whatever we're going to be using. It's also going to indicate what our performance metrics are going to be, what we're going to do, what we're expected to do in order to ensure success of the process of the project. We're also going to be used to refer to the collection documents that are subsidiary to the data management plan that detail the key planning and control elements of the study. It's also created during the planning phase of the project, but it's actively managed for the duration of the project, so some of the information can change. Then individual sections of the data management plan are completed at specific project milestones during project startup. And we're going to be talking about some of those individual sections as we go along. One of the sections in our data management plan is going to be the case report form documents, and they're going to include the case report form itself. As we said earlier, this is the instrument used to collect data from the site. It's also going to include the CRF completion guidelines, which are going to be instructions for the site to use as they're entering data to hopefully help them avoid making mistakes and hopefully cut down on the number of queries that they're going to get. It also includes our annotated CRF. Remember, I talked about how our database program is going to annotate the CRF. It's going to contain some data on there for specific variables or specific pieces of data that we're going to collect during the trial. Another element of the data management plan is going to be the edit specifications document, which is most likely going to be an Excel spreadsheet that documents all of the edit checks that can fire during the course of our trial. And it's going to drive our data review activities, and it's going to be used primarily, well, everyone would use it, but the data coordinators will use this as they're doing their data reviews, so they'll know what logic is being used in each edit check, and they'll have some instructions there on how to resolve certain conflicts that may occur. The quality control plan is another element of our data management plan. It documents a concise summary for all quality control processes that we're going to use in our clinical trial. So Our data management plan itself is usually going to be created at the startup phase, and will likely be created by a data coordinator or data associate, probably reviewed by our data manager. It's going to document, as I said before, what SOPs are used, what database system is used, any project-specific assumptions, and if we're working with, of course, if we're with a CRO, this would be a document that would be signed off on by our clients, so they would have input in that, and then they would agree that it's ready to be deployed. Our critical variable list is another document that's done at our startup phase. This will be created by the biostatistician and the lead clinical data coordinator. Includes data points that are critical to the statistical analysis, which include the primary safety and efficacy endpoints that we're after in our clinical trial. These will be documented in our study protocols, so we'll know what they are. And then this is going to be the really key data that we want to collect from the trial. And then once again, if we're working in a CRO environment, these would be approved by our sponsor client before they're deployed. Another document would be our data transfer agreement. This would be created by the database programmer, and the data transfer agreement outlines transfer data to the sponsor or CRO that may come from some other outside source. So it's going to identify how the media that's going to be used, how frequently that data will be transferred, what the format will be, and what the data structure will be, so that it can be entered into our database. We'll also have the import specification. This describes the process for receiving and downloading data conversion. And then we'll have the dictionary coding conventions. This is very important. This will be created by the safety data associates, so someone from our safety team. And it describes how adverse event, medical history, and concomitant medication data is converted to standardized format by assigning codes. So we'll use a series of dictionaries for this. We may use the World Health Organization Drug Dictionary. For others, we may use the MEDRA dictionary for assessing adverse event and medical history. What we're trying to do is make sure that we're using the same terms for each medical condition and for each drug name. So these dictionaries assist us in doing that. Next, we have our serious adverse event and adverse event reconciliation plan. This document is going to describe the project-specific processes and conventions used for reconciling serious adverse events within the clinical database. It's going to be collected or created by someone from our safety team. So it's important to understand that we collect adverse events in our clinical database, and then we also maintain during the course of a trial a safety database where that's managed by our safety team. And so the safety database contains serious adverse event data. And so throughout the trial, we want to do a reconciliation so that we know that the same terminology that we're using in our serious adverse event database, our safety database, is also being deployed in our normal clinical database. That we don't have one event that occurs in the clinical, that shows up in the clinical database that does not show up in the safety database. So we want to make sure the two are consistent across that and that they're adequately coded in both places. In other words, our clinical database shows an adverse event that's identified as a serious adverse event, and then that serious adverse event also appears in our safety database. So that reconciliation plan is going to become part of our data management plan. Database conversion specifications documents the conversion from data capture database structure to the target format delivered to the sponsor and is created by the database programmer. And finally, we have the interim lock plan. The interim lock plan describes the tasks that must be completed for an interim deliverable, and this is created by the lead data manager. An interim, every once in a while, at various milestones in our trial, we'll do a database lock or a database freeze, and we'll go ahead and take the data that's in our database and we'll have it reviewed. We may have it reviewed by an outside organization, a data safety management board, and what we're trying to review is primarily for safety data, make sure that we're not exposing patients to adverse safety risk. But we'll do that at various points during the trial. So this interim lock plan will explain how we're supposed to do that. And then finally, we'll have our database closure plan. This is going to describe the tasks that have to be completed in order for our final closure and database lock. And these tasks will be created by our lead data manager. That concludes our lecture on the data management plan. So we have a Blackboard assignment that you'll see out there under the discussion board. So what I want you to do is I want you to read Chapter 1 in your textbook, which discusses the data management plan. It'll be kind of a review of some of the things you've had here in the lecture, but do read that. I also want you to review Appendix A, which is the data management plan outline. You'll find that in your textbook as well. And then we have a response to a discussion board question. And the response is going to be, after reading the chapter discussing the data management plan, is there one component of the data management plan that you think is more important than the others? Explain why you think this is true. So tell me what you think about that. Explain your answer on the discussion board, and get that out there before the end of the week so that I have a chance to review it and respond to it if necessary. So have a great week, and I'll see you on the discussion board.